Hack and slash. This is the Biostats Core Special Topics Talk number 15, a survival guide to data analysis. I'm Mark Williamson for the DaCCoTA project at the University of North Dakota. So what are we doing here? Well, the goal of this talk is to deal with data analysis when you're backed up against a wall at all odds coming against you and you need some tools to help you survive. So we'll go over how to set the stage for dealing with data. We'll state 3 classes of problems that might come up with data analysis. Discuss 3 solutions for each problem, taking aim as it were, and then providing examples to each solution, be able to thrust at the heart of the problem. So by way of introduction, when you're dealing with statistical analysis and you're not yourself competent with statistical analysis, the best case scenario is to consult or collaborate with a statistician or statistically minded researcher. But best case scenarios are not always possible. Maybe you don't have the funding for it, not in the right location, or even in the educational situation. Perhaps you're a graduate student and that sort of collaboration is not possible, or your supervisor would like you to grow in your own statistical analysis abilities. So sometimes you gotta learn how to figure things out yourself. As we walk through these examples, just take care to take each of these tools with a grain of salt. These are not supposed to be definitive, absolutely work every time, best case scenario, best practice at all times. These are just a helpful sort of compilation of tools. So again, take this a little bit fast and loose. And finally, steps in these guides are not mutually exclusive. I kind of break them out into 3 solutions to 3 different problems, but certain problems might have all the tools applicable to them and so forth. So again, you can use these tools how you see fit and not just how I intro them. With all that out of the way, let's take a look at the content. So this is how I'm going to parse out 3 big problems I see when you're trying to run data analysis. Either you could really do it yourself, but you're too busy. You're facing up against something that's rather complex, so you maybe have a good foundation, but some of the complex analysis are beyond your normal abilities. Or 3, it's totally unknown. You're not even sure what to do at all with your data set. So busy as a beaver, complex like juggling, or unknown like the dreaded glowing question mark. Here are the solutions we'll go over, the tools, the tips, whatever you want to call them, your survival package. We have under busy, boilerplate, flexible model, and GUI use. Under complex, we have tiering method, cheat sheet, and multi-models. And then finally under unknown, we have visual first, data query, and decision tree. Let's get started with the first one here. We have boilerplate, which is a standardized document of code that's ready for common procedures and only needs to be filled in with the specifics. So instead of having to remember and type out every line of code, you can just keep the basics and then fill in the particular variables, data sets, etc. from there. So here's an example in SAS. You can see here it goes from everywhere from t-test all the way down to model selection. So in the documentation here, they use like var2 as the numerical variable or var1 as the categorical group, etc. Doing this in R, here's an example I pulled out and modified from one of my previous talks, making magnificently good graphs in R. These are for various plotting. You can see here the green highlight is the information you'd fill in. So your data set, your different variables to create different graphs. In fact, another thing you could even do is create your own functions in, say, R for doing things like This is, again, from making magnificently good graphs, making a bar chart, which a lot of times takes a lot of code. You need to summarize variables. So I made this function, bar chart ANOVA. And then when you call it, say using the iris data set, you can get that out and then customize it like any ggplot. So using your own functions could function as a boilerplate type application. The next option is flexible models. So you can use flexible models that can run multiple tests just by tweaking parameters rather than having to run different code for each and every test. So just like the mighty octopus with multiple arms to do different things all at once, flexible models will help you simplify your coding life. Great example here is just in R, even something as simple as the LM function, you can essentially run a t-test type test, a ANOVA type test, or even a regression type test. But if we turn to SAS, it gets even better. This was the object of one of my early talks, generalized linear mixed models for everything. So in SAS, you can use proc limits. You can use the same procedure to run all sorts of different things, even above and beyond the LM in R. So just with this code, I ran a t-test, an ANOVA, a regression, and even a generalized linear mixed model. So having flexible models really cuts down on the complexity of your tasks, especially when you're busy. The last option under the busy routine is GUI use, which is the use of a graphical use interface to graphically select and run tests. Well, I don't personally use this very much. This is certainly an option. So for example, in R, there's a package called R Commander, which essentially gives you this GUI. So in the example here, we have selected in a data set chick weight, so it's a lot of the drag and drop. You can do things like recode variables so that they're factors, and then you could even plot means. Within the means, pick out your factor and response variable, and then whether you want like confidence intervals, etc., labels, and then it gives you a quick plot of means. So you can see here that GUI, well, you may not use this for analysis. This might be a good quick tool for data exploration, so you can just get quick graphs that you're not going to really use for publication or series analysis, but you just want to look at it and don't have to type 10 lines of code in R. As another example of what you can do, of course, you can run classical statistical tests. So again, with our chick weights, let's do one-way ANOVA, and then this will come out here, and we can see, yeah, we ran ANOVA. Looks like feed was significant. Now, the nice thing about things like the R Commander, it does generate, it's a little hard to see here, generate the actual R code for each of these. So this is a great way as a learning tool as well, because it will give you the actual code so you know what was going on, so you could take that code and tweak it or use it to better understand how to use some procedures that may initially be baffling to you. Now, if R is not your style, you can, of course, use software systems that are essentially set up like GUIs, most notably SPSS. You can certainly do that and run that, though my main caveat with any sort of graphical use interface is really make sure you still know the underlying process of what's going on. It's really easy to click and drag and drop and all those things without really understanding the inputs and the outputs. And if you don't understand the inputs and outputs, you're not really going to have a coherent narrative of the results. Moving over to the complex branch, my first option I have is the tiering method. I could also call it the pyramid method. The idea is to start with the simplest model design at the bottom and progressively build up from there, getting more and more complex as you go. And no, this is a legitimate strategy, not a pyramid scheme. So how would we do something with the tiering method? Well, I'll draw on a recent example I used in a talk, the multi-level modeling for the uninitiated, where I really did build up models from simple to complex. So here's an example here with just a linear regression model, drag and hit as the y variable, and then arrow C as the x variable. But then make it a little more complex, adding cathedral as a random effect with a random intercept. We get this outcome. And then making it even more complex, adding cathedral as a random intercept and slope, so each of those lines can vary, and we get this outcome. So you can do that for all sorts of different strategies. Think about the simplest model and build from there. Maybe you're doing multiple regression. Maybe you start with just a regression with one variable and then add more variables. Whatever you're trying to do, starting out simple to the level that you understand the most and build from there. Next method we have is the cheat sheet, which is to deploy sheets with quickly available information for statistical methods, especially more advanced concepts. And so rather than having to try to pull together information on the complex models yourself or read a book, you can just look at a handheld visualization. There's a lot of these out there. If you want to do things like machine learning, here's a cheat sheet in R. Here's survival plots with the package SurvMiner in R. So really there's, the world is your oyster when it comes to cheat sheets. In fact, I even sort of made one in my talk Statistical Software Toolkit. These are, I looked at 5 different software packages or software programs and then gave example codes of a variety of examples. So this is almost like a combination of the cheat sheet and the boilerplate. So certainly use this if this is helpful. And the last one on the complex side option is multi-models, the idea of being ready to run multiple models that could fit the data and compare best fits. So rather than just doing one analysis, kind of like a printer, you print out several different copies and compare them. So an example here from I adapted from the Handbook of Statistical Analysis using R. There is this data set BDI, Beat the Blues, and they looked at a variety of different models, a sort of random intercepts regression and random intercepts and slope regression, a generalized estimated equation with a independence correlation structure, and then one with an exchangeable one, and then using ANOVA to compare the different models for best fit. Additionally, in something like proc Glimix, you could run Glimix with a bunch of different options. You could change the method, you can change the random variables, you can change how many variables you have in there, their interactions, and then compare those with a fit term like AICC, BIC, etc. If you're doing multiple regression, you can also think about model selection. So that's taking a multiple linear regression with a lot of variables. You're probably not going to use all of them because they're not either relevant or they're confounding, and so you can whittle down to a good final set. So in R, it's pretty easy to do. You can get your regression, put all your variables in, and you can use step. You can do forward regression, backwards regression, or both. I think the default is both, and so I'd advise something like that. And again, in SAS, you can do something very similar with proc GLM select. This is some baseball data. You can see I have all sorts of variables that I pulled in there to see what might best predict log salary. And so you can find the best model, and for all the models that were not very good, you can, well, I'll let you figure out what to do with those models. Getting to our final branch, the unknown branch. You have no idea what to do with your data. Well, why don't you try to visualize first? So get to know your data through exploratory data visualization. So summary tables, box plots, scatter plots, dimension reduction, etc. It'd be great to do something, if you have categories, do box plots. If you have like regression type style, you can do scatter plots, even scatter plot matrices. So you can look at a lot of variables at once, even see their distribution across groups. This is colored by group. And you could either do dimensional reduction like PCA. Like for example, this is penguin data, a bunch of variables, and they colored it by both species and sex. You can see definitely some of the species really scattered out by those dimensions. When you are trying to visualize your data, you want to make sure it's being useful. This is an example of a bad graph. It's really complicated. It's unclear what all the boundaries are. In fact, it's a pie graph. And now there are certain camps in scientific research that say you should never use pie graphs to display information. I'll let the professor give that side of the argument. The main reason being it's really hard for humans to spatially distinguish sizes of groups in the pie wedge, where something like a box plot would be a better output. Here's another example of a not particularly helpful box plot using the diamonds data set in R. It looks at categories of cut, color, and clarity. And there's a lot of categories you can see. You give a lot of information, but this is just way too much in one plot. It's just noise and can't really give any meaningful outcome. You can't even, in fact, see all the categories because it's too big. So make sure you are targeting your visualization into useful summary plots. The next option you can do if you're overwhelmed by the unknown of your data is to do sort of an inquiry. So you can try to answer questions you're thinking about your data and figure out the structure and variable information. So the more you understand your data set, the more you're going to be able to meaningfully and wisely analyze it. So I have a whole talk on how to communicate your data to statisticians if you are trying to coordinate or collaborate with a statistician. As part of that, there was actually a test, and this will be in the description as well, a link to a data questionnaire, so like a 4-page questionnaire that asks questions about your data to get you figuring out what you might do to analyze it. So that's certainly a option and tool if you'd like to use it. However, if you'd like just a pared down version of that, some quicker questions, I've developed a shorter, just 5-question questionnaire that you can ask about your data to get you thinking. So 1, what is your Y variable? So what is it? How is it measured? Is it categorical, ordinal, nominal? Is it numerical? And then therefore continuous or discrete? Same thing, what are your X variables? What are the variable names? How are they measured? And, are there other major considerations? That's question 5. Are there confounding factors, longitudinal design, missing data, etc. If you are able to answer these questions, this will go a long way towards a nuanced and helpful analysis. Lastly here, we have the decision tree, which is walking through branching decision to determine an appropriate test to use. So there are common ones on the web here. I actually even put together one for a animated video I did on statistical test decision tree. You can see here, depending on variable type, how they're distributed, etc. You can see the kind of test. This doesn't give a lot of information about how you decide on the branches. So if you want to see that, you can go to the video. But there are certainly other kinds of decision trees, some of them which are traps. And so not all test decision trees will be helpful for you. But there are certainly a lot available, both for generic statistics and more complicated specific statistics. Like in a talk on multivariate data analysis, a bird's eye view, I looked at all sorts of ways to classify and had 6 different decision trees for multivariate data analysis of what to do based on your data. So you could certainly pick up one of those and use it. Another thing you might want to think about is, in the long run, if you need it, is just to develop your own decision tree, especially if you're using a specific type of analysis, like say you do survival analysis a lot and want to think of your different options. That might be a great thing to set up to help your future self. Okay, dokie, we went over 9 possible tools in your survival toolkit, 9 potential options. So to conclude, working with a biostatistician would be your best, but certainly not your only option. If you struggle with a busy schedule or complex data or getting your head around unknown data, there are a lot of strategies to help you survive. Those strategies we talked through: boilerplate code, flexible models, UI usage, tiering methods, cheat sheets, multiple models, visualization first, data questionnaires, and decision trees. And if you want to sort of mnemically memorize these, I have little icons back. So if you boil a lobster, it'll learn to code. That's that first set. If you start a pyramid scheme, you go to jail and then have to print off copies of code. For the second one, and for the third one, if you see a question mark, climb a tree. So with that, please take the survey to see how this helped you. Just take a moment or two to do that. Here are references that I have, including several videos from previous talks that I referenced, as well as image references. Finally, the DaCCoTA is supported by the NIH under a grant, so please cite the Biostats Core and the DaCCoTA if you found this useful. Thanks for joining me, and have a rugged and jack of all trades day.